A U.S. sniper killed 112 Japanese soldiers in 5 days. Not with superior firepower, not with a better rifle. He did it with garbage, and a trick so strange the Japanese later described it as demon magic. And it all started on a morning when nothing was supposed to happen. Bougainville, November 1943. The jungle was silent, soaked in mist. The kind of silence that makes every Marine tighten his grip on the rifle. Across the clearing, Japanese observers watched the American line with the patience of hunters. Every movement was punished. Every raised pair of binoculars risked death. That's when Staff Sergeant Thomas Callahan set down something no soldier would ever consider a weapon. A dented soup can, stripped open at both ends, mounted on a thin stake he had measured down to the inch. He wasn't testing equipment. He wasn't drilling a new tactic. He was gambling his life on a theory so unorthodox his own commander said, "It shouldn't work." Honor said. At 0547, the sun broke the horizon. For 2 seconds, no more, a razor-sharp beam of reflected light shot across the clearing, cutting through the mist like a signal flare. It didn't look like a trap. It looked like a mistake. A glint. A reflection. A message. And 700 yards away, a Japanese observer made the smallest movement, barely lifting his head to identify the source. That was all Callahan needed. One breath, one trigger break. The first man dropped before the echo faded against the trees. But Callahan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Because the kill wasn't the point. The point was that the trick worked. A piece of trash had forced a trained Japanese observer to break discipline. And in that instant, Callahan understood something the enemy didn't. If sunlight could pull one man into the open, it could pull hundreds. The next 5 days would prove it. To understand how a scrap of metal became a weapon, you need to understand the man desperate enough to try it. Thomas Callahan wasn't born a sniper. He wasn't raised on doctrine or precision manuals. He grew up in Montana, wide valleys, long winters, and animals that could vanish at the slightest mistake. Out there, you didn't survive by shooting well. You survived by observing well. By 19, he enlisted days after Pearl Harbor, carrying with him a lifetime of tracking elk across mountain ridges. He didn't know it yet, but those years reading wind through pine needles, predicting movement before it happened, were more valuable than any scope or rifle the Marine Corps could issue. At sniper school, instructors saw it instantly. Other recruits aimed where the target stood. Callahan aimed where the wind would push the bullet a heartbeat later. He waited longer, breathed slower, thought deeper. One instructor pulled him aside after a flawless exercise and said a line that burned itself into Callahan's mind. A sniper's weapon isn't the rifle, it's the enemy's instincts. When pieces. Most students shrugged the phrase off. Callahan didn't. He stored it quietly, carefully, like a seed waiting for the right soil. War gave him that soil. Because Bougainville wasn't a battlefield filled with targets. It was a battlefield filled with shadows. Japanese observers, snipers, scouts, men who never revealed themselves unless something forced them to. And that was the problem. American units kept losing spotters and patrol leaders to invisible fire. The Japanese didn't miss. They didn't move. They didn't break discipline. Until Callahan watched sunlight bounce off a ration can and realized something no one else did. The Japanese weren't unbeatable. They were predictable. Curiosity, duty, doctrine, the need to investigate anything unusual on the battlefield. That was their weakness. All Callahan needed was a tool simple enough to exploit it. Something disposable, forgettable, beneath notice. Something like a soup can. The idea was insane, reckless, unmilitary. But Callahan didn't care, because for the first time since landing on Bougainville, he saw a way not just to kill an enemy sniper, but to control him. And once you can control your enemy, everything else becomes possible. War didn't give Callahan time to test theories. It gave him pain first. 3 days after arriving on the line, he and his spotter, Corporal James Rivera, were crawling a shallow ridge, scanning for a Japanese sniper rumored to be operating from the treetops. Rivera raised his binoculars. Just 3 seconds. just long enough for a disciplined enemy to confirm a glint of glass. A single round cracked through the jungle. Rivera collapsed without a sound, face first into the dirt. Callahan froze, not in fear, in calculation. He didn't dive for cover, didn't return fire, didn't scream for a corpsman. He counted the echo, tracked where the sound died, let his eyes trace the angles of sunlight cutting between the branches. He knew exactly what had happened. A professional was watching them, a sniper who didn't miss, a sniper who waited. Callahan dragged Rivera's body back through the brush, keeping low, silent, methodical. Every movement was measured, not out of discipline, but out of respect. That night, Marines whispered discussions of revenge artillery, mortars, a full sweep of the ridgeline. Callahan said nothing. He sat alone, with Rivera's gear beside him, turning over each item in silence. Then his fingers landed on the empty soup can from Rivera's last meal, dented, greasy, worthless, except there it was again. A faint reflection, a random flicker, a question forming in his mind. What if I don't have to find him? What if I make him find me? Well, the idea wasn't born from theory or doctrine. It came from grief sharpened into logic, from the need to force the unseen enemy into a mistake. Callahan wasn't thinking about kill counts, or tactics, or innovation. He was thinking about the sniper who killed Rivera, the man hiding in a canopy, confident he owned the battlefield. Callahan wanted one thing, to drag that man into the open, not with firepower, not with luck, but with a weapon no one would see coming, the same flicker of curiosity that had lured Rivera into a sniper's crosshairs. In that moment, Callahan's plan crystallized into something both brilliant and unhinged. He wouldn't hunt the sniper. He would bait him with nothing more than sunlight and a piece of trash that every other Marine had thrown away. Callahan didn't sleep that night. He sketched angles in the dirt with a bayonet, measured shadows with his hands, and tested how a beam of light behaved when the can tilted by a single degree. It wasn't engineering. It was obsession. By dawn, he had built something no Marine armorer would recognize. A crude reflector, an open-ended cylinder fixed to a stick, angled precisely toward a gap in the tree line where Japanese observers frequently rotated shifts. He planted it 15 yards left of his position, not directly beside him. He wanted the enemy looking the wrong way. Then he waited. The jungle stayed quiet, humid, motionless, the kind of quiet that eats patience alive. At 0547, the sun finally broke the horizon, and for 2 brilliant, blinding seconds, the can ignited. A concentrated flash shot across the clearing, slicing through early fog like a coded message. It didn't scream danger. It whispered curiosity. Callahan stayed absolutely still. Hundreds of yards away, hidden in palm fronds, a Japanese observer twitched just enough to shift his head toward the unfamiliar signal. That tiny movement was all Callahan needed. His rifle cracked once. The body slumped out of sight. But the kill itself wasn't the revelation. The revelation was the reaction. The Japanese didn't immediately return fire. They didn't search for muzzle flash. They didn't even understand what had triggered their comrade's death. They only knew someone had responded to that accidental-looking glint of light. Callahan exhaled slowly, studying how the shadows moved, how long the flash lasted, how the enemy reacted. This wasn't a trick anymore. It was a behavioral weapon. If one can could pull a trained observer out of concealment, what would multiple cans do? Placed in patterns, angled like signals, timed with sunrise and movement? Callahan didn't think like a sniper now. He thought like a puppeteer. He had found a way to make the enemy reveal themselves on command, not through fear, not through force, but through the irresistible pull of their own instincts. Garbage had become geometry. Sunlight had become deception, and Callahan had become the one man on Bougainville who no longer needed to search for his enemy. He could summon them. The next morning, he would prove it. The morning after that first kill, Callahan didn't celebrate. He refined. He spent 2 hours before sunrise crawling through wet underbrush, planting more cans. Some polished, some dulled with mud, some punched with tiny holes to fracture the light. some mounted higher to catch earlier rays of sun. He wasn't improvising anymore. He was engineering a language of light. By 0615, the ridge was silent again. Callahan watched from a concealed position 300 yards behind the line, holding his strings like a puppeteer. One pull shifted a can by an inch. Another changed the flash angle by a fraction. Then the show began. A quick flare on the left, a shorter pulse on the right, a faint glimmer directly across the clearing. To the Japanese, it looked like coded American communication signals from forward elements to officers behind the line. To Callahan, it was bait. For 20 long minutes, nothing happened. Even he wondered if he'd misjudged the enemy. Then a shape materialized in the tree line, a Japanese soldier creeping forward, half exposed, binoculars raised just high enough to catch the reflection. The moment the glass caught the sun, Callahan fired. Another clean kill. Another reaction he studied like a scientist. Another confirmation his theory wasn't luck. The cans stayed flashing, unattended, acting like ghosts long after Callahan had relocated to a new firing spot. The Japanese responded exactly as he predicted, firing mortars into empty jungle, searching for mirrors, scanning the wrong sectors, anything except the place Callahan truly was. It was working far beyond deception. It was rewiring their battlefield behavior. Every pulse of light forced them to choose, risk exposure to investigate, or remain blind to American positions. Either choice favored Callahan. By the end of the day, 9 bodies lay scattered across the Japanese perimeter, and not a single Marine had moved anywhere near the cans. When Callahan reported the results, his battalion commander didn't congratulate him. He issued an order: 5 days. No other tasking. Use whatever methods you need. Shut their snipers down. We're constant. Callahan nodded, already planning angles, patterns, timing. The trick was no longer a trick. It was becoming a doctrine, one only he could see forming. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just kill. He would take control of the battlefield. By the 3rd day, Callahan's light traps weren't just killing soldiers. They were disrupting the entire Japanese perimeter. Patrol leaders vanished. Observers died with binoculars still in their hands. Mortar units wasted ammunition, chasing reflections that weren't real. But one threat remained untouched. The sniper hidden somewhere in the treetops. The same phantom who killed Rivera. Unlike the others, this man never flinched at light flashes. He never peeked. He never repeated a firing position. He stalked Marines the way predators stalk prey. Patient, silent, unseen. Callahan knew he was facing someone who played the same game, and played it well. You don't trap a professional with gimmicks. You trap him with his priorities. So Callahan stopped thinking like a sniper. He started thinking like an intelligence officer. What did this enemy value? What information did he crave? What would force him to break perfect discipline? The answer came brutally simple: an apparent weakness in American command. A forward post, exposed enough to look careless, active enough to look important, real enough to make any Japanese sniper risk a glimpse. Callahan built it like theater. Marines carrying radios they weren't using. Map cases opened at deliberate angles. Runners moving between positions. And above it all, his soup cans flashing patterns that mimicked real American signal traffic. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked exactly like a command group preparing for a shift in the defensive line. To Callahan, it was a sniper magnet. He placed himself 500 yards north, tucked into shadows, rifle already dialed for range and humidity. The fake command post played its part flawlessly, moving with purpose, waiting for an audience. For 90 minutes, nothing. Then the forest changed. A leaf trembled without wind. A shadow thickened in a narrow opening of foliage. A branch dipped just a hair under a weight that wasn't supposed to be there. Callahan's pulse didn't rise. He just adjusted a quarter-inch left. Through his scope, he saw it. A small pocket of darkness at the perfect height. A sniper's nest. Then, the telltale sign. 6 inches of steel barrel eased into view, steady and deliberate, aimed at the decoy command post. This was the man, the one who never missed. The one who killed Rivera. Callahan didn't squeeze the trigger yet. He watched, waited, allowed the sniper to settle, because a settled rifle meant a committed shot, and a committed shot meant exposure. When the barrel locked motionless and the enemy shifted his cheek to the stock, Callahan fired. The round cut through foliage, branches, heat, humidity, and found its mark. The body didn't fall gracefully. It crashed through the canopy, breaking branches like bones until it hit the dirt with a thud that echoed across the clearing. Marines who recovered the nest later found notebooks, diagrams, casualty tallies, the work of a disciplined killer. A man who had survived countless engagements. A man who couldn't survive curiosity, weaponized by the one sniper who understood it completely. Callahan didn't celebrate. He just reset the bolt and whispered to himself, "One down, now we break the rest." Because the death of the Phantom didn't end the mission. It escalated it. Tomorrow, Callahan's war would become something far larger than revenge. Killing the Phantom sniper should have stabilized the line. It didn't. It destabilized the Japanese instead. The moment word spread that their best marksman had fallen to an invisible threat, everything shifted. Officers argued. Runners hesitated. Observation posts went dark. A battalion that once moved with precision now moved with doubt. Callahan saw it instantly. This wasn't just tactical success. It was psychological fracture, and he was nowhere near finished. The next morning, he expanded the battlefield into something the Japanese had never faced. A network of deception. Not one light, not one can, but an entire lattice of false signatures, flashes, angles, reflections, shadows, all timed to trigger Japanese instincts in ways they couldn't ignore. He placed cans at multiple elevations, aligned them to catch sunlight in staggered pulses, and used string systems to shift patterns without exposing himself. To the Japanese, it looked like a flurry of American communication. Signals coordinating patrols, repositioning units, preparing movements. To Callahan, it was a web. Every glimmer was a strand. Every response was a fly caught mid-air. Within hours, the Japanese began creeping forward again. Not boldly, not confidently, but anxiously. Men stepped from bunkers, scanning for mirrors or signalers. Some crawled, some crouched, all of them exposed. Callahan didn't rush his shots. He didn't need to. He fired only when they reached the perfect angle, when curiosity overcame training, when their instinct to understand outweighed their instinct to survive. Each kill fed the next. A soldier dies. His squad searches for the source. They expose themselves. They die too. It wasn't sniping. It was collapse. By midday, Marines reported Japanese troops firing blindly at phantom signals, hurling mortars into empty tree lines, and abandoning observation posts entirely. Callahan had achieved something rare in war. He severed the enemy's ability to trust their own senses. A captured diary from that afternoon summed it up in 5 terrified words. Light moves. Men disappear. It is sea. Callahan read the translation later and understood the truth. He wasn't fighting soldiers anymore. He was fighting fear, and fear, once fed, grows. Tomorrow, he would feed it more. By the 4th day, Callahan wasn't just killing men. He was reshaping their reality. The Japanese no longer understood what the battlefield meant. Signals looked like traps. Silence felt like danger. Light, once harmless, had become a death sentence. And Callahan pushed harder. Before dawn, he deployed more cans than ever, a full constellation of metal, each one angled to ignite at a different moment. Some flashed long, some flickered quick, some pulsed in patterns that looked intentional. To the Japanese, it resembled coordinated American movement, preparations, orders, repositioning. To Callahan, it was a tightening noose. He took a new firing position far off axis, where no sane sniper would hide, behind a ridge that gave him visibility along the entire Japanese approach route. When the first sequence of light began, the reaction was immediate. 2 Japanese platoons shifted positions, Officers yelling directions, scouts racing forward to confirm what they believed was an imminent American attack. They weren't thinking, they were reacting to illusions. And illusions are merciless. The moment an officer stepped into the open to direct his men, Callahan dropped him. When soldiers rushed to drag the body back, he dropped them too. Every decision the Japanese made created another opportunity. Their fear generated movement. Movement generated exposure. Exposure generated death. For 90 minutes, Callahan and his small security team turned the clearing into a pressure cooker. Not through firepower, through pressure. Mental, tactical, emotional. More cans, more flashes, more soldiers stepping into kill zones they didn't know existed. At one point, a full squad attempted to flank what they thought was an American artillery observer. There was no observer. Callahan shot them one by one as they crossed open ground, each man dropping before he realized the deception. By afternoon, Marines along the line watched something they'd never seen before. Japanese units repositioning with no coordination, officers waving wildly, men refusing to look toward the flashes, but forced to follow orders anyway. They weren't fighting Callahan, they were fighting shadows. And shadows don't miss. When Callahan reviewed the day's tally, 27 confirmed kills, he didn't look proud. He looked analytical, because he understood something the Japanese had not yet grasped. Their problem wasn't his rifle. Their problem was the battlefield itself, a battlefield he now controlled. And tomorrow, he intended to break whatever remained of their confidence. On the fifth morning, the jungle did something it hadn't done all week. It swallowed the sun. Thick clouds rolled in before dawn, smothering the horizon. No rays, no glint, no reflections. Callahan stepped out of his hide and immediately understood the problem. His entire deception network was dead. No light meant no signals. No signals meant no curiosity. And no curiosity meant the Japanese might finally stop bleeding. But war doesn't reward men who sit still. So Callahan didn't curse the weather. He adapted. He gathered what the supply teams considered junk. Empty ammunition cans, larger, heavier, with hard metal walls that resonated like instruments. He filled each with pebbles, small rocks, even shell fragments. Then he mounted them in trees, bushes, and roots. Anywhere sound could travel unpredictably through the jungle. Light had been yesterday's weapon. Today, it would be sound. At mid-morning, hidden deep in the brush, he tugged a string. The nearest can rattled softly, like distant gear shifting, or Marines repositioning a radio set. Another tug created a low clatter. Another, a shuffling echo. To the Japanese, already on edge from days of vanishing soldiers, the noises meant one thing. Americans were moving. Recon teams crept out to investigate, not boldly, nervously, in staggered formation, unsure whether they were walking into an ambush or misreading the jungle. Callahan watched through his scope, patient as always. A squad leader paused to listen, exposed. Callahan fired. A runner hesitated between two trees, exposed. Callahan fired. When officers rushed forward to re-establish order, he dropped them too methodically, without haste, like a man completing a list. By early afternoon, the Japanese perimeter looked unstable, broken by false movement, false signals, false alarms. The battlefield no longer needed sunlight to betray them. It had learned new ways to lie. At 1,545, Callahan's final shot of the operation found its mark. An officer coordinating frantic defensive adjustments. The bullet struck clean through the chest. At 1,600 hours, exactly 5 days after his experiment began, Callahan exhaled, lowered his rifle, and withdrew from the line. The total was staggering. 100 quantity confirmed kills. But even that number didn't measure the real damage. He had taken something far more valuable from the enemy than lives. He had taken their ability to trust anything at all. Light, sound, movement, instinct. On Bougainville, the battlefield itself had turned against them, and Callahan was the one who taught it how to lie. When the dust settled, the numbers stunned Marine commanders. Sandu's enemy soldiers eliminated, dozens of observation posts destroyed, intelligence networks crippled, and an entire battalion reduced to confusion and paralysis. But Callahan didn't walk away from Bougainville like a man celebrating victory. He walked away like a man carrying the weight of what he'd done. In the rear area, doctors examined him for exhaustion. Officers questioned him for reports. Historians would later study his methods. But Callahan himself? He refused to call any of it genius. "I didn't invent anything," he told a young lieutenant. "I just looked at the problem differently. The enemy played a perfect game, so I changed the game. This is all." With this Alpanid, to him, the cans weren't magic. They were necessity. A way to break a stalemate where conventional answers had failed. A reminder that innovation doesn't come from brilliance, it comes from pressure. Within weeks, his techniques were circulating across Marine sniper schools. Instructors dissected the method. Students practiced deception patterns. Steel plates replaced soup cans. Mirrors were issued as standard kit. And the philosophy behind it all: study the enemy, manipulate the enemy, weaponize the enemy's instincts, became doctrine. But Callahan never returned to frontline sniping. The Corps reassigned him as an instructor, recognizing that some men do their greatest service not by firing more shots, but by teaching others how to think. For decades after the war, students remembered him not as a killer, but as a quiet mentor who told them, "Your rifle is the last resort. Your mind is the weapon." Ortit. Only years later did he speak publicly about Bougainville, and even then, he spoke not of tactics or kill counts, but of cost. Those men were fighters, same as us. They were sons and fathers. Necessary doesn't mean proud. It just means necessary. And Intrity, when he died in 2003, the museum displayed his rifle alongside 3 rusted soup cans recovered from the battlefield. Not polished, not restored, left exactly as they were. Ordinary garbage that became extraordinary because one man chose to see possibility where others saw nothing. The placard beneath the display didn't mention kill numbers. It didn't praise the weapon. It praised the idea. Innovation wins wars. Tools only follow. To mine as Bected. And that is the true legacy of Thomas Callahan. A reminder that on every battlefield, in every era, the decisive advantage isn't technology or firepower. It's the human mind, courageous enough to improvise, bold enough to experiment, and relentless enough to rewrite the rules. A Marine sniper changed doctrine with a soup can, not because the can mattered, but because he dared to see what it could become.